Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Q&A of Belly of the Beast, a film that I'm sure all of you enjoyed, and we hope to bring out some more details about its production and the motivation and the context in which it was made through conversation. My name is Carroll Bogert. I'm the president of the Marshall Project. It's a nonprofit media organization that covers criminal justice. And we love double exposure because these are people who care about investigative journalism as we do. So it's an honor to be part of the festival. And I wanted to let Erika and Angela introduce themselves. Erika, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Erika Cohn, the director and producer of Belly of the Beast. And you may know me from some of my previous films, In Football We Trust and The Judge. And Belly of the Beast is coming into theaters this Friday, October 16th, and will be broadcast on PBS's Independent Lens on November 23rd. So please share that you saw the film here, and so excited to dive into the conversation today with you, Carol.
Thank you. Angela, do you want to say a few words of introduction?
My name is Angela Tucker. I'm a producer of the film, and Erika said all the things for you to know, but I will say that you should check out our website, bellyofthebeastfilm.com. Did I get that right? Yes. There is a petition that you can sign. A lot of people, after they see the film, are very emotional and want to know what they can do. And there's a petition there that is to bring reparations to the women who are forcibly sterilized in California. So you can go there and sign the petition.
Wonderful. Are you actually, Angela, would you describe yourself as the impact producer in addition to being the producer?
No.
Because that's a thing.
Yes, we have an incredible impact team at Red Owl that's run by Eliza Licht and Alice Quinlan and Nyasha Lang. So Red Owl is doing incredible work with the film, and we have a very large campaign that's rolling out right now.
Fantastic, yeah. I remember when I first became aware of that term, that there was such a thing as an impact producer on a film. I don't know exactly when the moment was, some years ago, and I was like, wow, what a smart idea, obviously, right? Every film, I think everybody wants their film to have impact. So we'll get to...
Yeah, it's important to have an impact producer. I also think it's very important to have someone who actually wasn't working on the film, because they can see the film differently than the team that's working on the film. Like, we've been looking through a certain lens, and a different team can kind of bring on their contacts and their kind of thoughts to, maybe this whole other organization could use the film and roll it out. Or there are all these other themes that exist within the film that could be useful. So
interesting. All right, well, we'll get to that in a moment. The first thing I want to ask, though, is I feel like the film was almost like a cliffhanger, because you couldn't bring it up right to the present day, but it just immediately made me want to know, and then what happened? Where can you sort of bring us from the end of the film to this minute?
Yeah, there's currently a reparations movement, as Angela alluded to, that Kelly and Cynthia are working towards. The end of the film, you see that there's this momentum, there's this interest in a reparations movement, but yet the bill to compensate sterilization survivors has not yet passed. And so right now, it's kind of hung up in budget requests, and I understand this is a very difficult time to get bills passed anywhere. But essentially, as Angela mentioned, you can go to our website, bellyofthebeastfilm.com, to learn more. The reparations movement compensates sterilization survivors, not only present day, who were sterilized in California's women's prisons, but also those who were historically sterilized between 1909 and 1979. And as you just found out in the film, over 20,000 people were illegally sterilized historically in California. And California was the most heinous offender of the illegal sterilizations during the eugenics programs across the United States. In addition to compensating the sterilization survivors, it also provides an opportunity for there to be a memorial so that we may never forget that this happened, and also provides a task force whose or financial backing for a task force whose sole responsibility would be to notify people who still to this day don't know that they were sterilized. And I think that that's a really an important point. As you find out through the film, you know, Kelly went through such great lengths to find out exactly what happened to her. And that people to this day still don't know that they were sterilized is just unconscionable.
It's incredible, in fact. What can you say more about the memorial? What would that, any sense of what that would look like or be, or how this might be memorialized? It's such a huge conversation right now about, you know, statues and ways that we memorialize history. How might this be memorialized?
Yeah, that's a question that's going on with survivors today about how they would like this to be remembered. You know, Germany has done such an incredible job of having reminders of their heinous history so that we may never forget. And I think California is on the precipice of doing the same.
Fascinating. So do you want to talk a little bit about how you heard about the issue or got interested in the issue, why you made this film? What was your initial kind of contact point with the subject matter, and how did you come to it?
Sure. Angela, do you want to start and then I'll rewind and go to the history?
Yeah, sure. Well, for myself, I got on the film about 3 years ago. But, you know, I would say, you know, as a Black woman, I live in the South. I am, you know, I'd heard about forced sterilizations occurring in different contexts, but it's something that I think that, you know, Black, Indigenous, and people of color know are happening. And I'd always felt like I wanted to be a part of a film that handled this issue in some way. And so I met Erika at a film festival and through mutual friends, and we, you know, she told me about the film and she had done some filming at that point. And, you know, I just knew that I had to be a part of the film. And really it was Kelly's footage, seeing Kelly, hearing the way she talks about what happened and seeing just kind of the grace that she speaks about it, and wanting to participate in whatever way that I could. But Erika has been on this journey for a very long time, which she'll tell you about.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, I actually met Cynthia Chandler in 2010, and I was so inspired by her compassionate release work. You know, she was the first attorney to be able to get anyone out of California's prisons under compassionate release. And I was also very inspired by Justice Now's Let Our Families Have a Future campaign, which exposed the multiple ways that prisons destroy the basic human right to family. One of the most heinous being, of course, the illegal sterilizations. And that really screamed eugenics to me. As a Jewish woman who grew up in Salt Lake City, the phrase, you know, never again was always in the back of my mind. And when I learned about this different kind of genocide that was happening through imprisonment and that was happening through forced sterilization behind bars, I knew that I wanted to get involved. And so Cynthia actually invited me into the organization as a volunteer. Initially, I was editing campaign videos and then later decided to become a volunteer legal advocate providing direct service needs for over 150 people inside California's women's prisons. And in the beginning, you know, in this conceptual idea of what the project could look and feel like, it was really about documenting the incredible process of working and being directed by people inside. You know, how does movement building, how does activism, how does human rights documentation work from the inside out? And it wasn't until a couple of years into the process I actually had a chance to meet Kelly Dillon. And as you see in the film, she's beyond inspiring, beyond an incredible character. And I'd heard about her powerful activism from people inside and through my work at Justice Now. But once we met, we really connected. And she actually at that point was trying to move on with everything in her life post-sterilization. You know, she's an incredible community activist, was doing domestic violence prevention work, gang intervention work, a lot of community building. And that was really the focus of where she was. So she was an advisor to the film before she actually became involved on the other side of the camera. And once the Center for Investigative Reporting article broke, there was all this momentum, as you see in the film, you know, for the series of hearings to be held, for there to be conversations that weren't able to be held before. And that was the moment that Kelly decided she wanted to dive back into this issue that had really, she had laid to bed. And at that point, we decided that the film, we would start filming, kind of she would go to the other side of the camera. And it was a delicate process from going, from being kind of behind the scenes to being at the front of the camera. But, you know, as we see in the film, none of this would have happened if it weren't for Kelly. So I thought it was really important. And as a team, we thought it was very important for the film to center around Kelly's story.
Yeah. Yeah, she is. I noticed you used the term earlier about she's an incredible character, and I had the instinct to use that term as well. But then character sounds so, you know, it also sounds wrong for really the role that she's playing in the film. And I don't know if you, Angela or Erika, want to talk a little bit about, you know, the role of a documentary film and advocacy and what it is to be so embedded in an NGO that's doing the work, and you sort of came out of that NGO almost, but at the same time you're trying to make a, you know, a documentary film that adheres to sort of the standards of the trade and you know, has credibility to a wider audience. I think journalists often struggle with this. They draw ideas and information and assistance from NGOs, but also feel that they have to, you know, approach the issue kind of head on, maybe in a different way than an advocate. Did you feel like making the documentary film was doing something different than advocacy, or did you feel that those really are the same thing? Was that a tangled question? Sorry, I meandered around there.
It's such a good question. And there's a lot I have to say on this, because this film would not have been possible had it not been in collaboration with people inside, had Cynthia and Kelly not been advisors and active participants in the film. Yes, they are characters and protagonists in the film, but they also advised from behind the scenes and were very, very involved in the filmmaking process. So this lens of objectivity goes out the window, and that doesn't necessarily make this film invalid or not journalistically sound. We actually worked with a team of investigative journalists to ensure that everything was being fact-checked along the way, that we did our own reporting, because the Center for Investigative Reporting's work was between 2006 and 2010, and we were looking at a much larger time period, a much larger scope. Our film focuses between 1997 and 2013, beginning of 2014. So this, unless you're a part of a movement, I don't really feel like this film would have been possible to make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's about gaining trust too, and without that trust, like Erika said, we would not have been able to make this film. I also feel like the industry, the documentary industry overall, I like that there's been a move away from the notion of the word subject, because, you know, it kind of, implies a certain kind of power dynamic that I don't think is necessarily beneficial or correct. And in our film, you know, Kelly wasn't a subject. She was really like a partner in this. Like, she's a partner in the impact campaign, and, you know, we wouldn't have made a film that she wasn't happy with. Like, she watched multiple cuts of the film. And I think, having worked on other social issue documentaries, it's incredibly important, if you want your film to have impact, to have the people who are within the film feel good about it. Yep. Because they're your partners in, you know, in making change with the film.
Right. That's interesting. And do you want to say anything about, since this is a film festival that draws inspiration from investigative journalism, the role of investigative journalism in this film is an important one. And may I say, Corey Johnson's an old colleague of mine at the Marshall Project. It was awesome to see him on screen. He's a wonderful person, and very proud of the work that he did on this story, I think, not to speak for him. But do you want to say anything about how it sounds like, in a way, the Center for Investigative Reporting reportage on this was almost was a sort of an engine, or it kind of propelled the story in some way. Do you want to speak to that at all, either of you?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of really interesting nuances to the role that the Center for Investigative Reporting plays, not only as, Corey as someone who is featured in the film and the reporting that's featured in the film, but also kind of the backstory. When we first started pitching this film, either people couldn't believe that this was actually happening, or they didn't care, or they wanted hard facts, which didn't exist at the time, because even though Justice Now had collected dozens and dozens of testimonies, and once I started collaborating with Justice Now and volunteering as a legal advocate in California's women's prisons, also brought to the table dozens and dozens of testimonies, there wasn't the reporting to back it up by a reputable organization, and there weren't hardcore facts that I think legislators, funders, people who would have supported this and thrust it into a national conversation. And so from behind the scenes, once the Center for Investigative Reporting story broke, that provided the film with the legitimacy to be able to secure funding and to be able to move forward with production. In the film, the Center for Investigative Reporting plays a huge role, one, because Corey is kind of the lens in which we're able to go back in time and understand the history of eugenics, and that process of discovery we actually go through with him. And also as the moment that both catalyzes this issue into conversation in social media, in the hearings and the legislation, but also the moment where Kelly decides in real life and in the film where she needs to become not only an advocate for herself again, but for so many others to prevent this from continuing to happen. And in terms of the relationship between journalism and documentary filmmaking or storytelling, I think that's a really, really important one. And when we applied for grants specific to journalists, we were kind of looked at as not journalists because we were documentary filmmakers. And when we applied for documentary grants that was specific to our investigative reporting, we were told that wasn't a legitimate allocation of funds. And so our industry has changed in the past couple of years, and I'm so excited that it's changing because these are not mutually exclusive. You can be storytellers and you can be journalists, and there's a nice way to interweave that. As you see in the film, it's this constant balance of journalism and character-driven storytelling. And in my opinion, and in many conversations with Corey about this process, that storytelling is so a part of journalism. And the great thing about this film is that it centers the Center for Investigative Reporting, goes beyond it, and adds, the actual names, faces, stories, real life experience to that reporting.
Speaking as a journalist, I would say it's also necessary for investigative journalism to really reach a wide audience, for it to live on different platforms and in different packages. Information needs to be packaged and repackaged in many different ways in order to reach the widest possible audience. So I would imagine, and again, I wouldn't want to speak for Corey or for the Center for Investigative Reporting, but to have almost a visualization of the kind of work that they did as investigative journalists is going to help their journalism go further. I mean, I hope people who watch the film will go back and read Corey's stories. It's also a good way to just learn more. And you know how it is to actually get an idea into your brain. It sometimes helps if it comes from all different directions, your eyeballs and your ears and every which way, and hopefully a panel like this too. So I wanted to ask about work on this issue in addition to what the Center for Investigative Reporting has done I guess I know about one other film, State of Eugenics, which is not about incarcerated women, but about North Carolina. And is there, first of all, can you say a little bit about what's happened in other states? And are there other attempts to track this either through film or journalism? And feel free to range beyond the borders of the United States, because you referenced Nazi Germany earlier, of course, and there are other countries that have engaged in forced sterilization. But maybe you could talk a little bit about other work that you know of being done on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, Erika can speak specifically about the work in North Carolina, because the film originally touched upon that and then sort of shifted gears a bit. But the one thing I wanted to say is, people see Belly and they think that this movie is kind of a worst case scenario. And, as we saw most recently by the forced sterilizations happening in the ICE facility in Georgia, but really these forced sterilizations are happening to women of color in the free world every day. And so, there are different examples of different, and lots of people, there's a great film called No Mas Bebés that people should watch as a kind of another resource. And there's a book called Building the Black Body by Dorothy Roberts, who is on our advisory board. And Medical Apartheid is another book by Harriet Washington, I think. Those were real resources for us in making the film and sort of seeing how this topic has been covered. But there's been also some reparations work done in North Carolina as well.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Is anybody as far along as California, though?
Actually, North Carolina and Virginia were the first to pass reparations bills compensating survivors of the historical sterilization abuse. And so California would be the third to follow in their footsteps. Of course, there's not the level of exposure about modern day eugenics in California. But I'll talk a little bit about the reporting that we did and kind of discovering that we just, Justice Now was literally the only organization that has devoted themselves to uncovering the sterilization abuse in this country. And our team sent FOIA, or Freedom of Information Act, requests to dozens of states across the country. And we know that at least 8 states allow for sterilizations under certain conditions, under certain circumstances. And in speaking with other organizations who do work with people in women's prisons, we know that the sterilization abuse is happening, but we don't know to what degree. And as you experience in the film, and Corey talks about, and also that I can attest to as both a legal advocate and as a filmmaker, the levels of secrecy and privacy that these institutions hide behind make it incredibly difficult to uncover these abuses of power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are also reasons for those privacy concerns, and people should have control over the information about their bodies, and so I can understand why there's HIPAA and why there are attempts to kind of protect people's medical histories from scrutiny. But yeah, I'm sure that was a frustration in making the film. It just added another layer of inaccessibility to the issue.
Well, also as a legal advocate, I mean, there were times that I requested people's medical records to validate or to help them understand what had happened. And it took years. I mean, we were sent blank pages multiple times. And it was this process of saying like, okay, or documents that were totally unrelated to the dates that we requested. And then, to have to go through that from a place of privilege as someone working in a legal organization, as someone who has access to all kinds of resources to be able to request those medical records and to have every side of the law on my side, compared to what it is like for someone who's in prison like Kelly and the challenges that they have to go through in requesting their medical records, both financially, in terms of, power dynamics, threat of retaliation. It's insane to have to that you can't have access to your basic medical history. and that your legal advocates don't have access to your basic medical history and takes them years. That's insane.
Yes. Well, yes, speaking from the world of investigative journalism, yes, the joys of FOIA. Probably many of our viewers have experienced the joys of FOIA. And of course, it has to be said that at least having FOIA is such a gift, because many countries don't have it. And, to have any kind of legal standing to make those requests is better than nothing, but it sometimes doesn't feel like it's better than nothing. It's just a slog. Yeah. Do you want to address also the objection, I guess you call it, raised by the OBGYNs in the film about people, and I may be garbling, I don't mean to speak for them, but the idea that women should be able to request a sterilization, that would not be a forced sterilization, but about the access to that medical procedure inside prison and or outside of prison, and whether the bill addresses or complicates kind of the right to access medical care that you wish to access while in prison.
So I'll start, and Angela, maybe if there's something that you want to add. I think that the important thing to understand that was really hard for a lot of reproductive rights organizations to comprehend in this process, if they hadn't worked directly with people who are in prison, that you see like with ACOG, for example, that the idea of having reproductive choice in coercive environments is something that a lot of organizations, reproductive rights, don't understand. In an ideal world, anyone, anywhere, anytime would be able to make choices about their reproductive capacity, about their bodies, with all possible options on the table. That someone would be able to make an informed decision about whether or not they wanted to have a permanent form of birth control, a temporary form of birth control, or no birth control at all. But what is missing from this conversation that reproductive justice organizations really understand, having the backdrop of the legacy of forced sterilization targeting women of color, is that within these coercive environments, the idea of informed consent is nearly impossible. And that when your daily existence is threatened by force, and that doctors are coercing you into these procedures, there is not the possibility of understanding what's going on and being able to advocate for yourself. It just, that idea doesn't land in these coercive environments.
Did you want to add anything, Angela?
No, I completely agree.
I think one of the things that's so interesting in this conversation that Kelly has always talked about too, is that in trying to understand our bodies, people in prison don't have access to the information that we have in the free world. So if a doctor tells you, oh, you need a hysterectomy, and you don't know what a hysterectomy is, where do you go to research that? We Google it. We just go onto our computer and say, like, is a hysterectomy the proper procedure for like heavy bleeding or cramping? No.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well,
yeah, and that's the kind of procedure that you would want to get a second opinion, and it changes your life in such a dramatic way, but that's not happening inside prisons, and that was there seemed to be kind of a disconnect there in sort of understanding that was the case.
Well, and not only is it about access to information, but it's also about the circumstances in which you live in prison and the lack of agency of people in prison who are not able to make any decisions, including, when you eat or what you wear, or, anything. There is almost no, people are very, very powerless in prison. So having the power to make such an important decision and a permanent decision as a sterilization there's a mismatch, as you were saying, Angela, to the very idea of being in prison and making a decision like a forced, like a sterilization, whether it's forced or not. And I wondered if you could say, there's so many costs to this policy, and the most obvious and most important one is the cost to the women themselves. But it also, in the context where we are today in the pandemic, to me, it also raised questions of what is the cost to society of a medical profession that is so insensitive to people's rights. And when we think about whether or not people would ever trust a vaccine, for example, or, it has a lot to do with who, of course, is making the vaccine available and saying that it's efficacious. But it's also, why would people trust the medical system when they have been treated this way by the medical system? And the cost to society of that mistrust and of that misapplication of medical power has ramifications beyond this issue.
Yes. I have a lot to say about this. Jump in. So I've been having a lot of conversations. I'm making some PSAs for the School of Public Health here at Tulane University, where I work also. And, we've been having a lot of conversations about the vaccine, the clinical trials. As we've heard, not enough Black people are coming forth to be a part of the clinical trials, and yet we are disproportionately affected by the disease. And it really goes back to what you're saying. It is just really hard, and I can speak personally, for me to sign up for a trial where I have to put my health in the hands of the medical industry, and I'm like working with the medical industry, and this goes back to the legacy of sterilizations that have happened, experimentation on Black people, Tuskegee, our Instagram account right now actually sort of has a timeline of experimentations that have happened throughout time. I don't have an answer, and these are the conversations that we're having, because there has been so many violations on, Black and brown communities, that I worry that our community isn't going to necessarily get the help that they need when in situations like COVID. And I don't have the answer in terms of regaining that trust, but I think that the medical industry has to acknowledge that a process does have to occur to regain the trust of the Black and brown communities.
Well, it seems like the beginning of the process would have to be an acknowledgement of what has happened in the past.
Right, so, exactly.
And
our country doesn't like to do that. Like we like to say, we've come up with a solution from now forward.
Yeah.
We don't like to acknowledge the past. Yeah. And that's something that isn't sitting well.
Yeah. Boy, tell me about it. I'm currently doing some research into how journalists covered criminal justice issues in the 80s and 90s when the prison population was skyrocketing. And let me just say, the profession of journalism has a few things to answer for too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole crack epidemic, we could just talk about that, how that was covered.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Separate subject. Okay.
I think what's really important to acknowledge that when we hold our institutions accountable, we can prevent future abuses from happening. Mm-hmm. So if we shove this under the rug, there actually will be no justice moving forward, and we can't guarantee that things won't continue to happen. I mean, California did acknowledge their history of eugenics in 2003 publicly. The governor of California actually apologized for the history, but there was no accountability. So it goes one step further beyond acknowledgement and an apology, and actually holding parties accountable. That can be done through reparations. That can be done with holding parties who actually committed these harms, individual actors, institutions accountable. And I really believe that that is the only way that we can prevent future abuses from happening.
Yeah. I don't want to make this go on too long, but I am super interested in some stuff that we touched on earlier, and I just want to come back to it, which is about sort of the role of justice now in the film, and Cynthia and Kelly as both subjects, protagonists, but also kind of drivers of the film, and of well, let me just say briefly, I've sort of spent a lifetime in and out of between advocacy and journalism, and one of the things that advocates often don't know that journalists or documentary filmmakers do is how to tell the story. How to tell a story in the way that other people can hear it and digest it and understand it as a narrative. Like, there's a skill to that, right? There's a skill to that in journalism. There's a skill to that in documentary filmmaking. and how an advocate sees the issue, or the things that are important to them, and then the things that are important for the narrative to have flow and arc and be, dramatic and watchable and great, those can be two different things. So can you talk a little bit about how you navigated or negotiated that?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that, not a lot of funders were on board for supporting kind of either end of this. And I just wanted to give a shout out to the Fund for Investigative Journalism, who really believed in this project from the early days and understood the power of journalism through character-driven storytelling, and were able to think kind of outside of the box about having Kelly and Cynthia as active participants in the storytelling as an asset. And I think that really is setting a precedent for the level of character-driven journalistic films in the future. So just wanted to say that. In terms of the negotiation of relationship, I mean, Cynthia Chandler has been on this project with me longer than anyone else. And Kelly has been on this project with me the second longest. I mean, these have been core team members and people who are so deeply entrenched in the subject matter, even more so than I am. Kelly and Cindy will tell you, this film is 20 years in the making. It's not 10 years in the making, it's 20 years in the making. We laid the groundwork for it. And so that there was never an issue of like, hey, I don't want your feedback, or hey, I don't want you involved in this process, because they, one, were so appreciative, deferential, trusting of our team's creative storytelling abilities, and two, were so active in advising things behind the scenes, and oftentimes they were like, we don't need to see a cut, like, just tell us when it's ready. We don't need to, like, whenever you want our help, just let us know, like, you do your thing.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, and that really goes back to the level of trust Angela was talking about, and the level of communication that we had, and also the kind of level of respect for each kind of component of this filmmaking process that everyone brought. And I also wanted to mention Courtney Hooks, who was the communications director at Justice Now in the film too. And, the relationship that we all had, both as someone, for me personally, as someone who was doing work alongside them as a volunteer and also documenting this movement, was just that collaboration with Courtney in particular was really unique and really special.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing about the creative process, which is, with social issue documentary filmmaking, there are a lot of roles. And what I like about it is there's a lot of people who come in and out of the process at different times and sort of move the film along. So there's two other producers, there's several executive producers, we had two editors, and each of them sort of came along in the process to move the film along. But it also is important in thinking about when you're so mired in all that happened, you do need outside people to come in and help you sort out the most interesting things that happen and what is a story that you can tell. And there was a real struggle in making this movie be good and entertaining and deep, but not such a downer that people couldn't engage with it. We wanted it to feel empowering too. And that was something that took time, but I think it's part of the documentary filmmaking process, is sorting out what kind of movie can you make that feels like it will have impact, but still be entertaining. That's
super interesting. Do you want to say...
Okay. I was just going to say thank you, Angela, for mentioning that, because I think it's important, especially to mention Angela's role as a creative producer in this. That this film could have easily been like 5 hours, or could have taken many different directions. Especially as someone who is like deeply entrenched in the movement, in the storytelling, in the process of human rights documentation. So. What Angela is speaking to from from my point of view, was just so essential to have that perspective and to have that that kind of larger bird's eye creative view, as opposed to being in the trenches,
in the weeds. Yeah. Do you want to say anything? I mean, Angela, do you want to talk a little bit? You spoke earlier about the impact producing, and what life do you want the film to have now, and what do you want to have happen?
Well, I mean, we want as many people to see the film as possible, and we want as many advocacy organizations to be able to use the film in whatever way that makes sense. So, when you watch the film, there's one way to take action. You sign the petition on the website that's tied to the women in California, but we hope that the film can be taken even further than that, and we really hope to have the film be seen inside prisons. And it's going to be on Independent Lens in November, and that's broadcast. Women inside will be able to see it. We're not sure how many will, but that's kind of a step in that direction. So we're just working with a great team to see just how many opportunities we can have. We just had a brain trust where a lot of potential partner organizations watched the film and talked about, ways, synergy that they thought in terms with their work. And so we're just rolling that out over the next year or so. Is
there a way for the film to have screenings of the film inside prison? Is that something you're exploring, or would that be possible? Do you anticipate would wardens let that
We'd like to. I mean, I know with COVID, it's very challenging. So I think right now we're just trying to spread the word out about the broadcast on PBS.
Right.
Because that, that's kind of a way for people inside to see.
Would you like to say the date of the broadcast? So that
it is November 23rd on PBS's Independent Lens.
Okay, check your local listings, everybody. Well, listen, it's been wonderful speaking with you both, and thank you to the audience for watching this Q&A with the makers, creators, birthers of Belly of the Beast. I'm sure I can hear from the way you talk about it, how passionate you are about it, and also how much of your lives you invested and how many years it takes. And I think maybe many people in the audience know, it's really hard to bring a documentary film into being. So I don't want to go too far with that birthing analogy given the subject of the film, but it is a process, and it can be very painful, and it takes a lot of fortitude and stamina. So let me also just say congratulations to you for this incredible achievement, and best of luck to you in reaching a wide audience with it. It's really important work.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Please share bellyofthebeastfilm.com. We'll find you. Yeah, okay. We'll find you on social at Belly of the Beast Film or at BOTB Film.
BOTB Film. Got it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.